Hi, everybody. This is Mandy from Trauma Informed Oregon, and I'm just going to take a few minutes to share a little bit of information that I embedded in a presentation and thought it might be helpful just to put it out in this way. Um, so I just want to talk specifically about like application as people are thinking about or having to reopen services and engage folks into programming. But I think these things also speak out to engaging staff for coming back to work and those type of things. This is not a prescription. All of this depends on, the age and the type of work you do. I specifically made I specifically did this particular couple slides in relationships to some folks who were needing to open up youth summer camps. So we were specifically focused on what that looked like. So I'm just going to share that, but I hope that what you can do is extrapolate some of that to the type of work you do and thinking about, again, always framing it in the principles of trauma informed care, about how this looks as we think about um, having people come back into service, have people come back into spaces, and et cetera. So this is, again, a little piece of a larger conversation, but the application piece. So I just want to talk about it. So think about, this is really geared for somebody dropping off a youth for a day camp. So before arriving, when I talked to these folks, we talked a lot about what's the prep work we can put into this. And I think it's, to the extent that we can, and we always can't, really important, right? And the principles of trauma informed care we're talking about here is prediction, transparency, and safety. So if you're thinking, for instance, of like staff coming back into office, what can you be doing ahead of them getting into the office that's going to be, more helpful, right, to predict those things? So obviously preparing for physical safety, like we all have to do that work, and that's not my expertise, right? So what is all the physical safety things we're doing to prevent the spread of COVID-19? After you know all those protocols, then you're stepping back and going, how can we communicate those protocols and be able to do those protocols uh, in a way that's going to be successful for all folks. So then we're going to bring in our trauma informed lens, our diversity, equity, inclusion lens, and how that's going to look across the folks that we serve. So to think about that, so preparing for those things, and then preparing your staff for those things, staff and those who you serve, right? So whoever's going to have to utilize those protocols and procedures, uh, talk to them beforehand. And if you're a youth camp, you're asking parents, what are you worried about? But you're starting with staff. Staff, what are you worried about? Are you concerned? What are your concerns? And kind of make sure, all to the extent that you can get all those worries on the table, and then you can start to address those things as you can. You're also going to want to make sure you communicate with those you serve about those protocols, right? And then how can they ask questions? What are the different ways they can say, because last minute they're like, wait a minute, I don't know. Am I supposed to take extra clothes or not take extra clothes, right? And then predict all the possible issues you can. So for drop-offs, you're predicting that some kids may be clean gear because they've been home with their parents. Some parents may be like ready to just hand their kids over and leave, and you actually might have to help them stay a little longer to help the transition, right? Some staff might be kind of jumping right back into work. Some staff may be really reluctant to come back into work. um, so predict any of those things, right? A lot of things we do in trauma informed care is we say things like, for many of you this may be like this, and for others of you this may be like this. So think about those things, and find ways to communicate them before people come back in, via email, phone call. So again, what you're going to want to do is remember those tenets of communication and do it, repetition and in multiple methods. So on sandwich boards and letters and emails, etc. During services, right? So if you're dropping off, youth are being dropped off for a day camp, you want to make sure, and again, this is true also for an office building, that you have somebody front and center. So let me back up a minute and say, when we talk about during the actual service delivery or engagement with other folks, we want to think about those principles around regulation, relationship, which is going to happen through predictability, consistency, and peer support. So we're thinking about having someone front and center who is reminding everybody about the new protocols. That needs to be your customer service expert, right? The person that people feel welcomed by, who also people trust, right? Because who the messenger is makes a really big difference. It may not be one person. It may be you find the folks people trust in different departments and have those folks help be the person who's going to share about the new protocols and the procedures as you move forward. But don't leave things for people to figure out. Even if you feel like you've said it 400 times in 20 different ways, don't leave it for people to figure out. If you're walking into a space and you're anxious because it's just new, because you don't know what's going to happen, or et cetera, that anxiety is not going to help you be in a position to try to figure things out on the fly. So you don't want people to be like, wait a minute, am I supposed to wear a mask or not wear a mask? They're not wearing a mask. Should I wear a mask? take all that away and put protocols in place. Everyone wears a mask. People don't. Like, whatever it is that you have, make sure everyone knows about that, and that person at kind of the first, and like if it's a camp, that first day of drop off, spend extra time there. Give you like literally more time in the day for drop off that day, because you're going to need to, you're probably going to be spending time with that. And even though you've communicated in multiple ways and all the right ways, you're still going to have the parent who's like, but you didn't tell me that, right? And you're going to need to really be in a place of regulation so that you can co-regulate with those parents, right? That you can take that deep breath and be like, I know it's really confusing. Here's what we're going to be asking people to do. So whatever it is, think a lot about giving time to that, and get the right people to do that. Have the words ready, or the phrases or the responses to when people may be not in compliance to the health procedures and protocols, right? And make sure this is consistent across staff. So I worry, especially with kid programming, that we have all these expectations that kids are going to be able to do these things, wash their hands all the time, not touch each other, all these things that are not pretty, the our typical behavior, right? And so I'm very worried that we're going to be yelling or correcting children all day long, and that's not what we want to be doing, especially at this time. And the same is going to be for adults too. And who corrects who's in charge of that, all that stuff is going to start to gurgle up, and what's going to be gurgling up in that is all the tension that we're experiencing already. And so take the time to figure that out, right? So after you have the protocols in place, think about when someone needs to go wash their hands because they've done a certain thing. How are you going to say that? Is it like, oh my gosh, yeah, you got to go wash your hands? Or can you have a phrase ready to go? Like, oh, remember, we have to do this. Or again, maybe you have pictures on the wall. Maybe you can sing a song. That's when you get your creative folks together to think about how to do that. Opening and closing, if you're programming with folks, it's opening and closing rituals. Specifically, if I'm working with youth and they're coming as young people and they're coming into a space, I'm going to probably be asking them to talk to me about, what do you see differently in this space right now, right? So on those first days and times, we want you need to talk about COVID-19, and you're going to probably need to talk about it, or any other events that are happening. You don't want to have the elephant in the room. So you're going to developmentally appropriately figure out how to have that conversation. What do you notice different? What have you been feeling? Like, what were your experiences in this, right? With COVID-19 specifically, there may be some real different information people have, or different feelings they have about what is needed or not needed. You want to be ready for that, because you don't want to figure that out again kind of in the moment. So if you have a young person who says like, I don't feel like I need to wash my hands, I don't believe that's like, so just be ready with whatever your statement is, and prepare those and give them to your staff so that you can say, it's like, a lot of information out there, we're still learning a lot here at this program, we are going to be doing this thing, right? So find those things and make sure there's pictures on the walls, there's words, there's ways to communicate those things that are in multiple ways, in multiple languages. So throughout the day, and this is for adults too, incorporate regulation. So rhythm, movement, meditation. So up the ante on that, right? So I would be doing it more often. So probably every 60 minutes, I'm going to want some type of 5 to 10 minute regulation activity or allowance for staff and for those I serve. And you can be creative in what that looks like. Having some space, if you can, where people can check it out, can self-regulate, can have some one-on-one time, and that may be outside, but think about doing that. And then after a day or an event, or the first time back to work, or whatever, however the context is for you, take a moment to reflect. This is new for all of us, and there's no simple playbook. And so, sit back and be like, how did that work today in the office space, or whatever that is? What feelings did people have? Were people feeling safe? And then check in with your own regulation, check in with your staff's regulation. Most likely these first encounters, several of them, are going to be exhausting, because we're like, I don't know, is it okay for this? And what do you need? And what do I need? And model that people just get to say those things. I start anytime I'm interacting with someone, it's like, where's your comfort level? But be able to say it in a way where people can actually answer. I'm going to be wearing a mask. I need you to wear one. Or I'm going to be wearing a mask. You need to do what you need to do, but I need you to stand this way, right? So this is an opportunity, and it's not always easy for everybody, but to really model transparency and direct and clear conversation and communication. Note any concerns that came up, right? So what are any thoughts it had? And then, then if you're working directly with youth and families, if there are concerns that you need to communicate to caregivers. be doing that as well. But I really do think it's important to focus in on these expectations and make them as clear as possible, because remember, when we talk about trauma-informed care and we talk about activation, what we know is that nonverbal people are really attuned to more so than verbal. So, you know, you're coming towards someone. Have you had this experience yet? You're walking down the street and someone like moves on the other side of the street, and sometimes I have to take them out and be like, oh, right, that's COVID, not like you're offended by me, right? So be thinking about how the more you can communicate, this is what we're going to be doing, it's gonna help people in that way. And then, you know, lastly, I would just say a couple kind of big things is remember that communication piece throughout, right? So important to communicate multiple ways, lots of clarification needed. You know, when we talk about youth specifically and we talk about like behavior, we have lots of folks who have been asking me about what behaviors we should be concerned about. And, you know, I think first to stop and say, is this just developmental, right? Is this what we would expect to be happening right now? We expect there to be regression for youth to be happening. So children who were sleeping through the night are probably no longer sleeping through the night. You know, babies who had moved to solids may be moving back. So that's pretty expected. We also know that, especially, you know, as things that in states of high stress, those things are typical. So in states of transition and stress, those things are typical, and youth and children will move through those things with the assistance of caring adults. So normalizing that is important. And, you know, addressing the safety concerns of youth, and what are all the things for that particular youth that are going to be around safety. You're likely to see a flow of behaviors, right? From the beginning to the middle to the end of a day, from the beginning to the middle to the end of a camp, right? So just know, right, as soon as something gets comfortable, it's likely to change, and start to notice where you see some of those places. And then I have another video about this. So I won't spend too much time about this, but, you know, be thinking about the impact of, you know, youth having different experiences during this time, if that's what you're working with, or staff that have different experiences, the impact of people feeling maybe not cared for during this time, the impact of grief and loss during this time, and then being able to note, you know, post-trauma growth, like what has been learned, what has been explored, what has been helpful and new, that people want to continue to go through as you do the work. All right, that's it. So it's just kind of a few things I wanted to throw out there for you to be thinking about. And please do share with us things you're finding. Thank you.